If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. In this episode, we address the 15 basic facts about building muscle presented by Men's Journal. What is most important for building muscle and aging well?
In our last episode of Aging Well, we discussed the difference between high repetition and low repetition and what you need to do in order to build muscle for your resistance training in your journey through aging well. Today, we actually came across an article through Men's Journal on the 15 most basic facts about building muscle, and we thought we would dive into it.
Yeah, and you know how I feel about Men's Journal and all the redundancy and all the kind of marketing aspects of the articles that they have in there. But this one particularly gives us a good framework in order to talk about what is important for building muscle to age well. So let's start with point number one.
Point number one, it takes protein.
Yes, it does take protein. And again, we don't want to get overboard with protein. And protein itself is not going to necessarily build the muscle. But there is some evidence that as we age, we have a little bit more increased protein need, and that increasing that protein, particularly the amino acid leucine, can actually be positive toward maintaining some of that muscle mass and preventing sarcopenia. So typically what I recommend for protein intake is about 1 gram per pound. Is that about what you've ever heard?
Yep, about 1 gram per pound.
Yeah, I mean, it can be maintained with less, but I think that's a nice, easy number to do the math on. And then so just taking and dividing out that whatever our body weight is times 1, which I think everybody can do that math, and then dividing that out between, spacing it out amongst our meals is going to go a long way toward helping us to maintain that muscle mass.
So you say spacing it out towards meals. I know there was a lot of research back in the day where your body can only take in a certain amount of protein at one point in time. I know there's a lot of literature out there that's now stating otherwise, that our body can take in more protein in one thing. Would you say breaking it up into 3 meals, breaking it up into 5 meals, and how much grams of protein should we be taking in per that one meal, in your opinion?
In my opinion, and I've gained this opinion from more intelligent sources than myself.
Right.
I tend to favor higher meal frequency. I think it is a little bit better for maintaining muscle mass, maintaining body composition, and those types of things. And most will generally recommend just dividing that evenly amongst those meals. I personally consume 6 meals per day. I always talk in terms of first breakfast, second breakfast, first lunch, second lunch, and so on. And so my protein is going to be divided up between that. And it works out to, I think it's about 35 grams per meal. We do absorb at a certain rate, but depending on the nature of the protein that we're eating, we don't have to get overly concerned about that. So if you're eating fewer meals, it's not like you're going to lose some of that protein, because if we're eating whole proteins, those take time to break down digestively in our stomach, and they're going to be released throughout the body. But there are certain proteins that might be more beneficial around our workout times because they're going to be more easily digested and more easily absorbed into the muscle. And that would be things like whey protein or certain plant proteins in a powder form that might get into our systems a little bit more effectively. And then maybe in the evenings, particularly if you're trying to gain more muscle mass, something like a casein protein might be useful for slower absorption throughout the night. But again, if you have a protein meal for your last meal of the day, that's digesting and absorbing and getting into your system throughout the night as you are sleeping. So I think if you just focus on 1 gram per pound of body weight of quality protein, then you're going to be better off.
Now, one thing we did mention in our last episode was the importance of refueling the muscle after your workout. And it wasn't just protein. There's another macro that goes involved. So it brings us to point number 2, and it takes carbs to build muscle.
Absolutely. And I think, we really covered that pretty thoroughly in the last podcast, which would be, I believe it would be episode 59. But it does take carbs because carbs are our primary source for the adenosine triphosphate for muscle contraction. And we need the muscle to be, it's basically, you're not going to leave on a road trip in your car without topping off your tank. It's the same thing with our muscles. If we are depleting all that glucose, all that glycogen from the muscle, then we're going to fatigue more frequently. And it's, again, using the car example, you go on a road trip, you start off with a quarter of a tank, you drive 50 miles down the road, you stop, you put another couple gallons in the tank, and you drive a little bit further, and then you got to stop again. It isn't as efficient as if we are having adequate carbohydrates stored up in the muscles for our trip, so to speak. And so the ideal time to get those carbohydrates is going to be surrounding our workout, because that's when insulin's going to spike. The carbohydrate is more freely available to get into the muscle. It's going to pull the proteins in with it in order to build more muscle tissue. And so that should be when we have most of our carbohydrates. What we want to avoid is having too many carbohydrates, particularly poor quality carbohydrates, further and further away from our workout time. So in the evening, if you work out in the mornings, having a, bowl of ice cream before bed is probably more likely to cause you to put on body fat than it is to replenish your muscle. Whereas after a workout, you have a bowl of Fruit Loops or something like that, which is a really crappy meal. And I do not recommend that for breakfast, but you can get away with it because your muscles are so starved for the carbohydrate that as you get that insulin spike, as that glucose gets out into your blood, it's going into the muscle as opposed to into fat.
So how would the insulin spike with carbohydrates? Obviously it's super important to build muscle, but how does that work with people that are either on a ketogenic style diet or an all carnivore style? Because they're obviously not taking in carbohydrates. So
So their body has to work a lot harder to get that muscle glycogen. And so from a performance standpoint, it's going to be far less effective. So anybody, like particularly athletes, if you're on a ketogenic diet, you're just stupid. I'm sorry. And I know there's people that are going to get offended by that thought because, I'm on the keto and it's great. And my brain adapts to it. And yes, your brain can adapt to using ketones for energy, and it may even have some benefits for clarity. And if you are an epileptic and you may need to be on a ketogenic diet in order to control your seizures, then yeah, by all means, that's appropriate. And I'm not knocking the ketogenic diet. I think it is great when it comes to losing fat, but it is horrible when it comes to performance. And the reason being is that we are not getting the most optimal fuel into our body in order to fuel the muscle contractions. And so the fat and the protein that we are eating on those carnivore diets or on a ketogenic diet are having to go through a process of being broken down a lot more. The fats have to go through beta oxidation in order to get into the muscle, but because the muscle doesn't have carbohydrate, there's a saying in exercise physiology that fats burn in a flame of carbohydrates. If we don't have adequate carbohydrates, the fats can't adequately metabolize, and so we lose all that potential energy out of the fat in the form of ketones. And they could be used elsewhere in the body, and yeah, that's going to help fuel the overall body's performance. But when it comes to athletic performance, or if we're trying to exercise, we're not going to get as much benefit out of that fuel as we would if we eat a healthy carbohydrate diet.
So primarily for the athletic performance and for working out, but for the overall aging well population, still taking in carbs, or should they be
recommend
should
carbs.
they be low carb?
Carbs should be suited to your activity levels and should be surrounding that exercise. So if you're not exercising, you're a sedentary individual, you probably need no more than about a half gram of carbohydrate per pound of body weight. If you are moderately active, you might be up to about 1 gram per pound of body weight. If you're more intensely active, then you probably need a bit more. And, so somebody that's training very intensely, an athlete, might be consuming 2 or more grams per pound of body weight in order to fuel the muscle. But I usually make my recommendations on carbohydrates based on activity level. Now, we need the carbohydrates in order to function. So if we went full on keto, which keto is in a strict form is less than 25 grams of carbohydrates on average per day, which is essentially an apple,
Right.
And it's not much in the way of carbs. And that has to be spread out throughout the day. Now, you can go fairly low carb for fat loss and still get some good, healthy carbohydrate sources in there, your vegetables and high fiber type of foods that are not going to provide a significant amount of glucose for the muscles, but they're going to provide enough for the body to function well, then you're okay. And so when we consider carbohydrates, I think we really need to consider our activity level and when are we consuming those carbohydrates so that they go to the muscle and not go to fat.
So whether you're eating keto or you're eating your carbohydrates as well as your other protein, this kind of dives right into point number 3, which is it requires frequent eating in order to build muscle.
Well, and again, the frequent eating is again more performance oriented and again associated with more of your carbohydrate and your protein utilization. People have great success in terms of losing body weight with intermittent fasting. And there are many who will argue the high points of intermittent fasting. There's others that will argue against it. I think from a performance standpoint, again, it's not going to be as effective in generating performance. And if our goal is to build muscle, get stronger, and improve cardiorespiratory fitness and those types of things, we want to eat a more healthy, frequent diet as opposed to a less frequent and low carbohydrate diet. And so more frequency is going to allow for protein to assimilate much more steadily into the muscle. It's going to allow for more of that protein to be utilized. It's going to allow for better digestion. It's going to allow for the carbohydrates to be available when they're needed without excessive spikes in insulin that could lead to fat deposits. And it's also going to make it easier to maintain a lower caloric intake, because when we eat frequently and we eat foods that satisfy us, and one thing that this article doesn't mention is fats. I think when we are not consuming carbohydrates to get them into the muscle, healthy fats are going to help us to remain more satisfied and less hungry, and we're not going to eat as much. And that's going to be beneficial. And so eating more frequently is going to cause us to eat less, and it's going to allow us to utilize the fuels that we eat more effectively.
All right. So another critical portion in recovery and rebuilding muscles is sleep. Now, sleep is actually point number 4. And I know we've kind of skimmed on sleep, but I do think that sleep is arguably one of the most important but overlooked item when it comes to building muscle and overall health. I think the importance of sleep. I think we, especially in Western culture, are in a society where we're just so go, 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 go. And we're overstimulated by so many things from computer screens to television to our phones. Um, and I think we don't get as much adequate sleep. I know you've mentioned in past podcasts, your family makes fun of you because you have a bedtime. And I know a lot of people that do have bedtimes, but I don't think they're still hitting that deep level of REM sleep where their body's producing that melatonin in order for them to fully recover and actually rest. Yeah, I don't think, I think with the increase of like sleep apnea and overstimulation or overconsumption of caffeine, I don't think we are getting the most adequate amount of sleep that we once were at some point in time.
I probably say that caffeine is probably a little less of the issue. Sleep apnea is probably a little bit more rare. Some of that might be associated with our levels of obesity in this country. But there are many things that are disrupting our sleep. First of all, is that we are watching too much television or on our screens, computer screens, too late at night, and that light disrupts our ability to get into a healthy night's sleep. We did mention, and I think it was in episode 57, that the American Heart Association has added that to their recommendations that people get 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. I've always, kind of gone with Arnold Schwarzenegger with the, if you're sleeping sleeping more than 6 hours, sleep faster. Didn't do my Arnold voice there, but I think 6 good, healthy hours of sleep is going to be sufficient. Ideally, a little bit more. We should target toward 8. And that's why, I tend to have a 9 o'clock bedtime so that I can get up somewhere between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning in order to work out. Because that's the only time I really can work out. And so having a sleep cycle, whether it's 6, 7, 8, 9 hours, is going to be very beneficial because it's going to help us to maintain a little bit better rhythms to get better sleep when we sleep. Now, as we age, some of us men have issues where, we have to get up frequently to go to the bathroom and those types of things that can disrupt sleep. So, doing the things that we can do to give us the most quality sleep is going to allow us far better recovery, allows our muscles to grow. I believe the article talks about the role of growth hormone and testosterone, those being released as we sleep. Those are going to help the muscle to grow. But our body needs time for recovery because all that rebuilding happens as we sleep.
Any pro tips on how to get better sleep besides a bedtime?
I think, have a bedtime. Don't get on that computer screen right before bedtime.
Yeah, I would say eliminate screen time for at least an hour before bed.
Which is
read a book, dive
difficult.
into it.
Yeah, read a book that'll put you to sleep. Doing things like, in some situations, some people benefit from like a warm glass of milk. I've heard of people who, just simply having even like a warm glass of water or, some kind of habitual habit, some habits at night that just kind of put you in a rhythm that now your body knows it's time to sleep and it's more prepared.
Doesn't magnesium help with sleep?
There's a bunch of different stuff it's supposed to help. And I think if it works for you, then do it. If it doesn't work, then why bother with it? A lot of people take melatonin like crazy and it doesn't work for them. Melatonin tablets, as I understand, are probably supposed to be a little bit better when you're trying to readjust your sleep-wake cycles as you're traveling back and forth across time zones. That has a negative effect. I've had a nutrition friend years ago who suggested that a dose of sugar, like a candy or something like that.
Oh, that makes sense because
the insulin spike gives you a little bit of a crash that helps you kind of fall asleep. But again, if diabetes or, you are trying to manage those carbohydrates for body composition, that may not be the best approach for you, but find what works for you. And I think really just this sleep-wake period. Having a bedtime, having a wake up time is going to go the farthest in terms of being able to maintain a healthy sleep pattern.
I would also suggest, if you listeners are deciding you want to go to the route of taking a sleep aid, to do your research on it. It's really, really funny to me. Actually, in the local supplement store here, they have a sleep aid section. And if you actually read some of the ingredients on there, there's one in particular. It does have melatonin in it, but it also has GABA and taurine. You know, taurine, the thing they put in energy drinks to give you energy throughout the day. Why would you take that right before bed? That makes...
Two things there is, first, stay out of the supplement stores because you're just going to waste your money. Second, don't be taking free supplements.
How am I going to get my whey protein, though? Huh? How am I going to get my whey protein?
Go online. You can get it cheaper anyhow. Or, if that's got to go to the supplement store for that, then just go to the whey protein section, go to the cashier, pay for it, and get out of there. Don't let them sucker you into a bunch of other bullshit kind of supplements. I mean, again, we've talked about supplements before. The only 5 that I'll put on a list are going to be, whey protein, casein protein, creatine, carbohydrate, and caffeine.
I'm going to get Alex Whitaker back on here. He's going to talk more about supplements.
I love Alex, but I'll also tell you that, he can profit from those supplements as well. I mean, there are some benefits to some supplements, but the reality is far too many of our listeners focus in on what supplements they can take to aid this or to be a hack for this. And they don't put the work in that's going to be more beneficial anyhow. So, when it comes to building muscle, it's more important that you put the proper work in than you take the proper supplement.
Well, and also a key word there is it is a supplement, meaning you're supplementing something that you're not getting naturally, right?
Yes and no. I mean,
so if you're getting everything from your diet, then you don't need supplements because you're getting everything from.
But caffeine as a supplement is not something that
it's necessary to keep me going throughout the day. Anyway, speaking of keeping me going throughout the day, let's hop on to number 5, which is that foundation is important. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah. Now, in this case, they talk in terms of, I'm just going to read this section because it's pretty short here. It says beach muscles and Olympic lifts draw more attention, but the many little stabilizer muscles around your shoulders, hips, and midsection, collectively the core, which kind of represent the core there somewhat, but provide a strong foundation, challenging the stability and mobility of these key muscles with medicine balls, physio balls, mini bands, and rotational movements, lifting and chopping pays huge dividends. Now, so basically what they're saying there is focus on the core. And by the core, we got to be clear that that's not just simply the abdominal muscles. It's not just doing crunches. It's not just doing planks. It is all of those muscles that surround and stabilize the vertebral column. And I like to go with the spiral line. Physical therapists will often refer to that. And it's this kind of helix-like connection of muscles that runs from the occipital bone at the base of the skull, down all the way down through the back, around down the legs and around the ankle and back up, and crosses the body and really provides this key stabilization for the body. And I think when we talk about foundation and core exercise, we want to look at the exercises that are going to give us that stability. And so we start with stabilization, then we look at anti-rotation, anti-flexion, anti-extension, and then we go into more dynamic extension, flexion, rotation of those core muscles. And so there are tons of things we could do. They mentioned medicine balls, physio balls, bands, rotation, I would say anti-rotational as well, movements. I love the Bulgarian bag. I think that is one of the best tools to use for dynamic core exercising. I do like planks, but I think planks get a little bit overused in the aging well population, where it's just how long can I plank for, and that's all you generally do. It takes you so far. Once we get that basic stability, then we want to add to it, and that's where I think, again, with maintaining a stability, doing loaded movements like the squat, Zercher squat, overhead presses, any of those kind of things that are forcing those muscles to contract to stabilize are going to be better in the long run than just simply planking. But,
well, I think it's what's also is some of the exercises that they had mentioned that you were reading. They talked about, a chopping motion or a lifting. So they're not just, they didn't mention anything as far as crunches go with stabilizing that core, right? Just the actual rotation and everything just kind of starts in that main area. I guess essentially you are building a foundation, right?
Yeah, I think it's a plus for this. This is one of the first probably men's journal articles I've seen that really didn't push crunches and all the other kind of stuff for core strength. But yeah, so we want to do the stuff that's a really, I generally hate the phrase functional training, but, when I talk in terms of some functional strength, I think the core is functional strength because it's allowing us that foundation, that base off of which we can build all the other strength movements and patterns. And if you have a weak core, you're not going to be able to build all the other aspects. Should we go on to number 6?
Number 6. Now, this one seems interesting. Number 6 is routine is the enemy.
Yeah, I am not a big fan of this number. I personally do not favor this idea of muscle confusion and constantly changing the challenge for the body. I believe more in, and we promote the basic 5 movements. Now you have some variations of those, and that's, I think, a little bit more what they're going after here with the routine is the enemy, that, you're not always back squatting, not always just straight deadlifting, not doing the same bench press movement. You're changing your angles, changing grips. But I would say you are going to get better benefit if you keep to the same exercises for a longer period of time, learn the technique, build strength off of those multi-movement patterns, but vary things like the number of repetitions, the intensity, maybe the number of sets, and focus less on constantly changing the exercise. And so if we're talking routine is the enemy in terms of how we manipulate the volume of the exercise we're doing, the intensity, the sets, the variation of the movement, I think routine is the enemy. But if we're talking about doing basically the same repetition scheme, but changing the exercises constantly, I don't agree with that. I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
No, I agree with you. I think people should get into an actual routine and start doing the movements. I guess I'm agreeing with you, and the fact is, we have to have a routine. We have to have those fundamental exercises, those main staples. But maybe what this article is saying is once if you come in and you're just doing 50-pound weights and only 50-pound weights, and that's a part of your routine, and you're never increasing it to 55, 60, or 70, that could be.
That's not what they're saying.
That's not?
No, I mean,
then I
this
have
is
no
exactly
idea what they are.
this is exactly what they say. They say training at a constant time of day is a great thing, but having a routine workout is not, since the body quickly adapts. Constantly challenge yourself by adding different movements. When you do turn to a familiar exercise, aim for a personal best. So there, first of all, the last sentence is a bit contradictory. There is that when you do this familiar exercise, you're going to do it the same, but do it, the best that you can.
Get a PR.
Yeah. You don't need to be adding different movements. Remember, we've talked about there really are only 7 fundamental movements that need to be included in a resistance training program. You have the squat, the hip hinge, the horizontal push, horizontal pull, vertical push, vertical pull, and carries. And carries being really a means of activating the dynamic core. That's it.
Yeah.
And so the movements aren't different. You might accomplish them different by changing up the squat so that you're not getting into that same routine back squat pattern. You're changing up doing front squats, searcher squats, goblet squats, one-legged, and doing split squats and those types of things. But you're not dramatically changing the movement. You're changing slight dynamics of the movement pattern. And I think that's what we should be doing. But we also have to allow enough frequency of that movement to be able to see incremental gains in that particular movement pattern. And so I would suggest, at least sticking with a movement pattern for at least 3 weeks or so before shifting and changing your exercises. And so changing your exercises in cycles of, say, 3 to 4 weeks makes a little bit better sense, but still maintaining those basic movement patterns.
It's about the rear view.
Okay, well, what the heck is that supposed to be?
Well, I heard one time that when you're driving, the rear view is what you look behind, and
That's
it's
not
okay
what
to
they're
look
talking
behind you, right?
They're
But
not
you always
talking
have to
about
focus on what's in front of you.
They're really just kind of focused on and it's a weird way of basically saying that we need to deal with the gluteal muscles because they tend to get less activation because we're sitting on our butts all day and not doing things. And I would strongly encourage that, particularly in the beginner exerciser, to focus on the gluteal muscles, which again really kind of comes back to the core a little bit. When we have good hip strength, we're going to protect the knees, we're going to protect our ankles, we're going to have better overall stability in the body, and we'll be able to do the exercises that we do. And so really just in a nutshell here, I think what they're saying is that we need to also be focusing in on doing hip exercises that are multi-directional, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, but also some of those oblique angles as well. And so doing the things that are going to help build the muscles and activate the gluteal muscles. I think that's a pretty reasonable point, just not well made in the article maybe. How about this one, number 8? Women won't get too bulky.
What? How does that have anything to do with the 15 basic?
Well, it's basic fact about building muscle.
I was saying it's a fact that women won't get bulky.
Yeah, women have this tendency to fear lifting weights because they're afraid they're going to get too muscular. And the point that they're trying to make is that that's less of a worry. But they say basically, unless women take steroids or harmful supplements, they won't get big like men. But I think that's a load of B.
Oh, really?
BS.
Okay.
Because, and I've made this point several times before in a podcast where a number of years ago I had a student who asked me in a class, he said, how do you respond to a woman who says, I don't want to lift weights because I don't want to get big, bulky muscles? And on that particular day, I was in kind of a bit of an ornery mood. And I said, just tell her she's not willing to put the work in. And it dawned on me, I was like, that's the correct response. Because in the past, it's always been this response. Well, women, unless they're on steroids or they're taking supplements, are not going to build big, bulky muscles because they don't have those hormone levels and things like that. But the reality is, in order to build big muscles, big, bulky muscles, whether you're a male or a female, it takes a lot of work. And if you're not willing to put the work in, you're not going to grow them. And even if you have the genetic predisposition to putting on muscle easily, which some women do, if that's your case and you don't want big bulky muscles, you don't have to put as much effort into your resistance training,
Right.
which is fine. I wish I had that problem, but most women do not have that problem where they're going to be building big bulky muscles just by lifting weights. But if they want them, they got to put the work in. If they don't want them, they're not probably putting in the work anyhow to get them, and so it's not a big, huge concern. And so women and men will not get big and bulky lifting weights unless they try to. Point made.
Point made. Mic drop.
Yes. Let's go on to number 9. Timing is important. We've been talking about that with nutrients in a couple of the last podcasts. Anything to add to that? That basically we want to get our most optimal nutrition in surrounding our workouts, because that's when the body is most starved for carbohydrates and proteins. And other parts of the day, then we're better to kind of just eat the foods that are going to sustain us more effectively.
Do you think timing could also be the time that you're doing your workout routine based off of hormone levels throughout the day?
There's some evidence with that. There is certainly strong evidence that the most optimal times to resistance train is going to be, I think it's between about 11 and 1, and I think it's like 6 and 9 p.m. That's when our muscles are the most warmed and we're going to be able to lift the most. But the reality is, if you get so focused in on timing your workouts when your hormones are going to be the best or when your muscles are going to be most prepared, most of us don't have the schedules where that's going to work out in our favor. And so don't worry about it. Just do it when you can, and you're going to get it done. And it may be less optimal, but doing it is more optimal than not doing it.
So what about timing? Obviously, as a part of your routine, you're resting in between your sets. That's got to be important.
Yeah. And again, the rest periods are something that we can vary up in order to optimize the adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
That when we're trying to get the most amount of effort in the lift, then we need to rest a little bit more so that we're fully recovered between those sets so that we can do the additional set. When we're going for something like just sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, shorter rest is going to be more efficient. We're getting those reps in a shorter period of time. We can optimize our training time by doing supersets, by shortening the rest periods and all those types of things. But that is just a component of the training. It is not, a hugely important principle. Number 10, so is getting wet. So this is a typical Men's Journal heading. I mean, it has nothing to do with really what they say per se. I mean, they kind of started off talking about water sports and swimming, that they're great ways to build muscle. I would probably disagree. I mean, maybe swimming, you could build some muscle, but again, it's much more endurance-based activity as opposed to hypertrophy-generating activities. But what they're really talking about is drinking sufficient water. And yes, there's no denying that adequate hydration is going to be important, and that we should, as they say, drink about 1/2 to 1 ounce per pound of body weight per day to maintain our hydration. And I would add that drinking just straight water is much better for our overall hydration than going crazy with some of these electrolyte drinks and things like that, that people tend to drink because they think they're working out very hard.
Be careful with hydration. I one time hyperhydrated. I had an old football coach, and all of our football coaches back in high school, they were like, you need to drink water, drink water, drink water. You should be drinking so much water that you're peeing every 10 seconds and it should be clear. And that's what they told our young, impressionable high school
Every
mind.
10 seconds, what are you going to wear, a diaper?
No, we were just running to the restaurant, and I took it serious and I said, you got it, coach. And I drank 3.5 gallons of water, and I completely flushed my system of electrolytes, and I passed out on the football field, and I woke up in the hospital with 2 IVs in each arm. That is a true story.
It's actually very, very hard to do that. So typically when I teach about that in physiology of exercise, I will talk about that, it's generally, or that's in pathophysiology, we talk a little bit more about that. There's usually some mental aberration that generates that. So it's really hard to consciously hyperhydrate.
I didn't consciously do it.
You obviously consciously. I mean, you drank 3 gallons of water. You have to think about drinking 3 gallons of water.
Well, yeah.
So yeah, just don't drink too much at one time, and you'll be.
I would say a gallon a day is good. Half a gallon is also good, but
it depends on your body weight, as I said. But drinking fluid regularly is, really what we're targeting after.
So number 11 seems a little contradicting, and it says it's not just about muscle, or it's not just about lifting.
Well, again, it's one of their poor headings. I think what they're talking about is it's not just about lifting weights in a traditional sense, as they talk about, you could build muscles flipping tires and carrying logs and hauling jugs of water, which I think there's some truth to a lot of that. I mean, you see people who do construction for a living, they tend to build muscles without having to go to the gym.
Farmers.
Farmers. So everyday movements are important, but, it's important that we focus in on getting as much of that other functional type of activity as well as getting into the weight room and lifting to build some strength.
So number 12 actually kind of goes back to our last podcast episode, and the more muscles involved, the better.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the more that we can lift in a particular movement, the more effective the muscle exercise is, and the more muscle we're going to build. And so the idea of this is just, we're better off, in order to build muscles, focusing on doing more complex multi-joint movements as opposed to isolated types of exercises. And it takes intensity, which we've just refer back to episode, I believe, 59, where we talk about intensity. And I think really where they're going is off a little bit. They talk in terms of not wasting a lot of time resting between sets and kind of supersetting or doing push-ups in the middle of exercises in order to keep the intensity up. Now, we need to recover to a certain extent between sets of an exercise. How we do that, how we frame the workout to accomplish the volume of work that we do, is going to depend on factors like how much time we have in the gym, what are our goals, and what is our workout for that day. And so the key is use your rest effectively and don't waste time in the gym doing nothing that is not purposeful. If you're resting, they say smartphones produce dumb workouts. I think that's kind of ridiculous, because you may be just simply using that time in between sets. You might be on your phone. I'll play a little game of Freecell or Spider Solitaire or something like that between sets, because I lift by myself in a gym and I have like a 1-minute rest. Rather than just sitting there staring at a wall, I might do that and get up and do my next exercise. I don't think that disrupts my flow in the gym. If anything, it helps. But the key is to not disrupt, not lose your focus in the gym, and get the work done and get it done effectively. It says it takes, and they have in parentheses, active rest. So building off of just simply having, your sleep at night to recover from the exercise, they talk about a little bit more activity throughout the day. Now, I think it's got to be a little bit of caution when it comes to active rest, that too much activity can impede our ability to recover from the exercise that we're doing. And so the more active we are, the more we have to take that into account in our maximum recoverable volume that we talked about in episode 59. I think it is important after exercise to keep moving a little bit to help remove that lactic acid. And generally, it's anywhere from about 30 to 40% of your VO2 max is recommended to help facilitate the oxidation of that lactic acid. Keeping moving throughout the day helps us keep loose, keeps us from the muscles tightening up, cramping up, and doing those types of things. And so a good amount of active rest is going to be important rather than just simply bedridden type of rest. Anything to add to that?
No.
All right. And then last but not least, it's never too late. And I think we've talked about that in this podcast pretty frequently, that no matter what your age is, if you haven't started lifting yet, haven't started a regular, well-balanced exercise program, then now's the time to start. There's no need to delay. It doesn't matter what your age is. I had a client that was 84 when he started lifting for the first time. So, and I'm sure there are people older than that who start lifting. So if you want to age well, start doing it.
Start soon.
Yeah. The sooner
Start
you
now.
start
Wake
aging
up.
well, the better you're going to age.
Go turn off this podcast and go pick up a set of dumbbells and start lifting.
I wouldn't say turn off the podcast, but maybe you have this podcast in your ear as you are doing the exercise. Anything else to add to the 15?
No, I think that these 15 actually kind of go hand in glove with a lot of things that we've talked about in our previous thing. And I think overall, there's a lot of information out there. And if you guys find any information and you want to say, hey, Dr. Armstrong and Corbin, can you guys look into this? Is this real or is this fictional? Send us any information. We'll try and do our research on it, and we'll give you guys the facts.
Okay.
In order to age well.
And if you eat the right amount and right kinds of protein, get your carbs at the right time of day and in the right amount, eat frequent meals, get your regular sleep, do those more foundational type of exercises to strengthen the core, try and have some level of variability within your workout without becoming too routine, but without becoming too variable. Focus on the glutes. Women, don't worry about getting too bulky. We like muscle anyhow. Timing is important for our nutrients as well as perhaps our workouts. Get plenty of hydration, but not too much. Try and do other types of functional movements other than just simply lifting the basic movement patterns. Incorporate as much muscle as possible in your workouts. Focus on your intensity and specificity. Get active rest. And just remember that it's never too late to age well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.